Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in Nuka World. You can see King Cola's castle in the background there to talk about another one of the creatures that were added by the Nuka World DLC, and we're talking about the Brahmiluffs. So I just spawned kind of one of each variety in with the console commands just so that we can get a closer look at them. So they do come under the heading of a large ruminant, just like the brahmin that we discussed previously, and the radstags, the deer that exist. But these guys actually originate from an African species, so they look much more like the African buffalo rather than the native species, which is the American bison. The American bison is sometimes called the American buffalo, sorry. But it is a separate species and they're not that closely related. But it makes sense that we have them here because in this Safari adventure it's got a zoo, so they would have potentially non-native species in the zoo, and we know that they were using a genetic replicator to create their own species and their own specimens and things. And it does make sense, and the terminals do mention that as well, that they had the likes of the black mamba and the death adder in the children's petting zoo section, which is an interesting choice for two of the most deadly snakes on the planet, but here we are. That's a whole other conversation. But the African bison, it's a large ruminant species that has got 5 subspecies, and the one that looks the most like these ones in the game is the Cape buffalo Sinceris Kaffir. And they have a long stocky body and their horns are fused at the base, which gives that characteristic bony shield on the top of their heads, which is called the boss. They are herbivores like all the other kind of large ruminants. They graze on grasses and plants, and they do live in a herd structure which is matriarchal, so it tends to be the kind of oldest, most dominant female that's kind of in charge, and they have subherds that often consist of sort of younger animals, especially young males, that are kind of satellites to the main herd. But when they're under threat, they will group together and they will move the vulnerable calves into the middle of the herd in order to protect them from predators. So the main predator that goes after the African buffalo is the lion, and generally for an adult buffalo it takes a full pride to bring them down, because they are willing to defend themselves. They are strong and they can be aggressive. They have been known to kill lions, and they have been known to chase them up a tree as well, to chase them away. They are also known to be kind of dangerous to humans for the same reason that they see us as a potential threat, and they are big and they're strong, and people have been killed by buffalo in the past, so certainly something to be wary of if you were to ever come across them yourself. They are listed as near threatened in terms of the kind of conservation side of things, and people do hunt them as trophies. They're one of the big 5 game species in Africa. Their numbers are reducing, but there are populations that are within protected areas like national parks and reserves in some parts of Africa. So just like cattle, we have a 4-chambered stomach, which consists of the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum and the abomasum, and they chew the cud, so regurgitating the food to chew it again, which helps break down the tougher fibre in the plants that they eat, which makes it more available to the bacteria that break it all down inside the rumen. So it's a very interesting kind of system that obviously gives rise to the term ruminants. So as we discussed in the Brahmin video, the radstag video, and the bighorner video as well, they're small ruminants because they're sheep. So small ruminants tend to be things like goats and sheep, and larger ruminants are the kind of bovine subsection, which does include bison, buffalo, cattle, deer, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the distinction between them. They are not genetically similar enough to cattle or bison to be able to hybridize with them, unlike what we see with the American bison, which can and has been hybridized with cattle to produce beefalo, so a kind of combination that produces a different kind of beef that's a bit leaner and a bit better in terms of nutrition. But that can't happen with the African buffalo because they are just too genetically distinct for that to be possible. But like we've seen with all the large ruminants so far, that the main mutation in fallout is that we've got two heads. So thinner hair coat as well. They do still have some fur, as you can see, but a lot more kind of exposed skin than you would expect to see. And they do have quite large ears, which is something that, again, that's seen in the African buffalo, and they do have these large horns, which do look like things would be a bit awkward because the horns are quite big, that they probably would clash all the time when they're trying to move their heads independently. So it does look a wee bit awkward. And there's no visible udder, unlike the brahmin, which has a large udder that you can see kind of hanging down. These guys don't have that. Probably the reason for that is because of the difference in species. So brahmin originate from domesticated cattle, and one of the things about domestic cattle is that they have been selectively bred to have larger udders to have higher milk production. So that would be the reason, whereas these guys haven't really been selectively bred for that purpose in any kind of way. But some of them have been domesticated, so you can see here this one is not aggressive. It does appear to be one of the longhorn ones as a pack Brahmiluff, so used very much like the pack brahmin. You can see they've got the dirty mattress and then all the bags and chests and things strapped to them. So unlike the bighorners who refuse to be used as pack animals, the Brahmiluff do seem to be willing to kind of be tamed and be used in that way. And there are a couple of variants. So over here, this is your standard Brahmiluff, which has the very distinctive kind of merged horns on the top of the head and the boss, as we discussed. And then you've got the short horn variant here. You can guess why it's got that name. But these ones do look a bit more like the American bison. In terms of the way the horns are, you see the horns are completely separated, and otherwise, you know, they've got exactly what you'd expect to see from any kind of bovine, with the nostril and the top lip, and they don't have upper incisors, which is true to pretty much all ruminants, certainly all the bovines and all the ovines and caprines, being ovine means sheep and caprine means goats, that don't have upper incisors. They have a kind of firm pad, which is what they use to grab the plant material and rip it to eat it, basically. So they have that typical thing, and they have these big long ears. And then we've got the longhorn variant here, which interestingly, this variant seems to have evolved so that the inside horn on each head is much smaller than the outside horn. Presumably this obviously would make things a bit easier in terms of moving the heads around without the horns getting caught on each other, unlike what we see with the kind of standard Brahmiluff. So that's kind of interesting. And you can see possibly, yeah, slight difference here, that the inside horns are a bit smaller, which isn't really the case for the standard Brahmiluff. So interesting. But yeah, so the longhorn one obviously called that because it's got really short horns. Of course not, but these are kind of long and straighter as well. And other than that, there's really not much difference between these variants, other than their appearance. So if we have a look, so yeah, level 40, 10 defense, 10 radiation resistance. Level 40, 10 and 10. The pack one's level 3, so they're much, much weaker. And then the standard one. So there really isn't, unlike a lot of them where there's different variants and some of them are stronger and more powerful, with the Brahmiluff that doesn't seem to be the case. They are just different kind of varieties. And I say this one definitely looks like it could have originated from the American bison rather than the African buffalo. But the standard Brahmiluff definitely looks like your African buffalo, and it's probably come from the safari adventure, and then the species has just managed to kind of thrive and live here. But yeah, it's an interesting one. If you do cripple their head, then the horns appear broken. I'll see if I can demonstrate that actually. Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, that's not gonna that's not gonna fly. Too high level, really. Yeah, although that one seems to have lost its horns after I killed the other head. But yeah, so you can see that they don't drop anything unique either. It's just Brahmin meat and Brahmin hide, so exactly the same as what you would get from a Brahmin, which you can then turn into steaks. But they are aggressive, other than the pack Brahmin, which have obviously been tamed and are not aggressive to humans. The other varieties are automatically hostile to you, and unlike the low level radstags, they won't flee, they will attack if you encounter them. So that, you know, you will have to fight them off. But yeah, it's interesting, and again, I like the variety and having some new things. I mean, it's good to have some of your classic enemies like your death claws and your mole rats and all the rest of it, but I like that, you know, a new place means new creatures that have established themselves in the local area, and have potentially different origins. I say having an African species running about in the wasteland when we're in the US is interesting, but it kind of makes sense because there is a zoo within this park that housed species that weren't native to the US, so it stands to reason that when the place was abandoned, some of the animals still managed to thrive, and they've obviously mutated along the way, but they've stayed and they've thrived, and I think that's really interesting. So I say kind of a brief one today, and if you do want a wee bit more detail about ruminants and how their guts and things work, I did cover that in a bit more detail in the Brahmin video, which I'll link in the description, and I'll put a wee link card here as well if you want to check that out if you haven't seen it already. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. Hope you found this interesting. I'm sorry the video has been a bit delayed. Had some family issues and things going on this weekend. Unfortunately, it's been a bit chaotic. But hopefully you enjoyed it anyway, even if it's a day late. And as always, I love to hear your thoughts. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.